Hello, this is the front desk.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Crackin' Backs podcast with your hosts, Dr. Terry Wyman and Dr. Spencer Barron. How you doing this morning, guys?
Good. Lance,
It's great to hear.
I'm doing great, Lance.
It's great to hear. So today we have Dr. Monique Mokha, and she is a certified athletic trainer, professor of kinesiology and biomechanics, and a sports scientist who conducts primarily running biomechanics research. How are you doing this morning, Dr. Mokha?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
That's great to hear. I'm doing well as well.
Well, I gotta kick this thing off because I have some of your students, past and present, that have shared a couple things, interesting things about the way you teach, Dr. Mokha. So I'm just going to hear it from you, but I do know one day you walked into a class on the first day with boots, jeans, and a Rolling Stones t-shirt, and I heard you looked like a badass. Now, on that note, you know, we oftentimes, I've always heard that there's no boring subjects, but there's boring speakers. That we know you're not. So when there is a challenging time, you know, when teaching techniques could go sour, is there anything you do to engage students the way you do best?
First of all, you had me sweating when you're like, students said, then you're like, what are they saying, right? Okay, because I am aware that, Dr. Barron, you have a lot of our students past and present, so I do feel better. I mean, yeah, Rolling Stones t-shirt, benign.
This is only the first 5 minutes of the program, so just so you know.
Okay. So that's a good question. You know, they talk about, in academia anyway, we talk about active learning and how to get people involved so that it's not, you're just standing there lecturing and people are falling asleep. I do know I do a lot of Q&A. And I mean, I just slam them with questions. I will do a lot of demonstrations myself that get attention, whether that's standing on a table or banging on a wall or, you know, everybody get out of your chairs, jump as high as you can, you know, whatever you're wearing today, just jump as high as you can. That kind of stuff. So physical stuff, I think, gets people involved.
That usually works best. Get the blood flowing, especially depending on what time you're teaching class. You know, could be early in the morning or right after lunch. You know.
Sure, but I try not to get too creative. I mean, I'm creative, I think, but not too creative so that they are too worried about trying to understand the creative thing we're doing. And it's like, no, man, it's just F equals MA. That's all I'm trying to teach. You know. So I have to be careful to not get overly.
Well, I will follow up with every student that I have ever spoken to about Dr. Mokha. They glow because they've enjoyed your class. It's brilliant. It's active. You're so passionate about biomechanics, and they learn so much. So when I inherit a student from the university, they're always coming in well equipped. I have a question for you, though, another one. And that is, I'm not sure if you're going to remember this particular lecture that you gave. It was titled Isaac Newton Meets Mikhail Baryshnikov. Do you remember anything about that?
It was a really long time ago.
Yes, it was.
Well, because there may be some listeners going, Mikhail Baryshnikov.
Yeah, who's that, right?
Right. Yeah. Like an incredible dancer, turned actor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing physique.
Yeah.
But I do remember that.
So being that, Isaac Newton was one of the greatest mathematicians and physicists in the world, how did the roads cross between the greatest ballet dancer of all time and what was the subject matter?
Okay, this was really cool. Two pieces came together. First, where I was at that time, it was at Barry University, and I was interfacing a lot with trying to get to know people on campus, and I met this woman who was a dance instructor in their performing arts there. Really cool, vibrant woman, young, and she was trying to explain basically the physics of dance to me. Kind of thing, not really knowing that I was in biomechanics. And I was like, that's really cool. It's kind of like Sir Isaac Newton meets Mikhail Baryshnikov. And she said, oh, it is. And I said, wow, I'm going to create this presentation out of this. That's like something we can mix here. So the short of it is I took some pictures. I believe I don't think I started this, but I've seen them everywhere now where people will take, say you're going up for a rebound basketball, right? And then you can also see a similar move that a dancer is making on stage, like this. And we had them side by side. And then we would talk about, what the mechanical concepts are behind being able to jump and put your body like that. So it was really fun. Yeah.
That's amazing. I have a professional ballet dancer. He's the only athlete I've ever treated that could stand flat-footed in my office, jump up and put his
They're
forearms
so powerful
on the ceiling.
Packed little bodies. They're so powerful.
It's unbelievable. He picked up skateboarding and was almost a pro level within like a month because his balance was so great. And he did the coolest video that went viral on TikTok where he's skateboarding, doing all his tricks, throws his skateboard, and the next scene he's doing this beautiful ballet. Yeah. And it just showed you how.
What about our discus thrower, our U.S. women's discus thrower amazing. Champion, Valerie Allman? She comes from dance. She was a dancer turned discus thrower, and when you see her throw the discus, you're like, oh yeah, she's very coordinated. Amazing. She's very, very beautiful throwing the discus.
I had another thing I was telling a guy when he was like, well, is ballet really athletics? I go, here's what I want you to do. I want you to grab a 140-pound dumbbell, and I want somebody to throw it at you, and in one motion, you bring it straight over your head and then go up on one foot. And I go, if you can do that, then we can talk. But if you can't do that, then you have nothing to talk about. Yeah. Because these ballet guys are having these women come running at them. They jump up and then they push them up with one hand, and they weigh between anywhere from 130 to 150 pounds, and they're holding with one arm. And then they go up sometimes on their toes. They spin around, and then they toss them. So I go, let me just take a 150-pound dumbbell, well, three of us, and then throw it at you, and let's see if you can grab it and throw it over your head. And they go, oh, I never looked at it like that.
How about the skaters?
I'm like, well,
sorry, couple skaters.
I'm like, good Lord. I was, and then they're doing all that little blade, at these, people don't look at these athletes like they should, because they are amazing. You work with, looking at your history, you work a lot with disabilities. You work disabled athletes as well as regular athletes. As a scientist and as a researcher, have you seen any similarities in both those categories that kind of are universal?
Oh,
when it comes to injuries and stuff, everybody looks at different categories, but have you ever
That's a really good question when you push that injury word out there, because the injuries aren't necessarily different. So an athlete who's blind can sprain their ankle like an athlete who's not blind. So, and it's not even necessarily that they get hurt more, that's for sure, but you're going to see sport difference injuries. So that's how I look at it, sport different injuries. You go, what's that got to do with disability? But we talk about wheelchair basketball players. They're going to have a lot, right? A glenohumeral joint, shoulder dysfunction, that kind of thing they're going to have because they're up here all the time. And they're pushing. So much pushing.
Right.
So it isn't necessary. Right. But if you're in a chair, using a chair for basketball, you could have spinal cord injury, you could have leg calf perthes, right, the hip dysfunction. You could have a lot of different things. So I think it's more sport.
Right. Do you like the challenge of looking at the two difference? Because, like you just pointed out, I think a lot of people don't really look at our Paralympic teams with as much vigor as they should. That's my personal thing. I love working with Paralympic athletes. I think they're mentally tougher. I think they're amazing athletes because they have to deal with disability on top of their training and top of their sports. So the grit is amazing. But do you ever, as a biomechanics expert, are you intrigued by the
I am, and I share this piece with you guys. The two of you, of course, as chiropractors, yes. So you're doing physical evaluations, and I came through the ranks initially as a certified athlete trainer. So I'm still an AT, but I went on into, geeky sports science stuff. So here's why I said that is, how we learn, and any of clinicians out there, you learn right away, compare bilaterally. So here I am, a young clinician. Before I had my master's degree already, but not my Ph.D. in biomechanics. And I was helping. So I wasn't in charge, but I'm helping with our women's U.S. basketball team. And she's like, oh, my knee, is bothering me on one side. And I'm like, okay. So clearly she did not have spinal cord injury. She had amputation unilaterally. So I'm looking at her knee. First thing we learn is to compare bilaterally. And you're like, oh. So, right. I'm standing there. I got my hand on her knee, getting ready to evaluate her. I'm like, I have everything I learned in the books, gone. So that's it. It really tests your training, All
right. On that note, there's a lot of stuff out there on functional movement screening, the FMS, right? So you just kind of pointed out, how do you consider a person's anatomical do we consider the asymmetrical differences?
That's two things, right?
Where are your views on that test?
With certain populations, someone who doesn't have lower limb, then we're not going to have them deep squat, FMS category, right? I mean, they could do some level of a pistol squat maybe if that's what you wanted to see, right. Unilateral function on the the residual limb. But the other question about what do you think about the functional movement screen? Hey man, until something comes along better, I like it, and I use it. I believe I use it for what it was intended to be used, or how it was intended to be used, rather than, it's a holy grail of prediction for this and that, all of these things, But I tend to agree that if you can move well first, foundational, functional at that level, basic movement patterns, then you build on top of them. I really do. Go ahead. We can get into it about this. I don't mind.
Yeah. Because you know what? I'm going to follow up with an impromptu question as a tagline to this one, and that is, I've seen it. Well, even at Miami Dolphins, when they were very rigorous about FMS, and what we saw was one or two cases where they actually were instructed to change positions or reestablish their, let's take the squat, for example, and reposition their feet according to what FMS, functional movement screening, should look like. And they ended up with aggravated hip joints because nobody took under consideration the anatomical or the bony structure difference. For example, we all take for granted that we're equal on both sides. And, like we talked about before, we're often not. And the one particular athlete we knew, one had an anteverted hip, a normal positioned femoral head in the acetabulum, and the other was retroverted. And, what do you do in a situation like that? That's where FMS...
But Spencer, the FMS is a screening tool, not not how you're supposed to squat for exercise. So maybe it was possibly used incorrectly. So we have them point their toes forward for testing purposes, for the assessment, to see if you can go into the squat pattern with your toes forward. And you get a 3, 2, or 1, as you know, or you have pain, you get a 0. But then when I go in to do my training, I'm not testing anymore, I'm training. So now if I need to put my toes out a little bit because, like you said, there's an anatomical issue with the femur in the head, you know, or in the acetabulum.
That makes more sense now. And I will be fair to say that what I'm describing happened like 7 or 8 years ago. And that was, you know, early on still early on in FMS. No, maybe around that time. But, you know, and it was used so rigorously that I see where there was some challenges to it.
Yeah, I think just sometimes we wanted it to be more, you know, or we wanted it to, but
yeah,
I think if we use it right, it's a good tool. I have found it to be a good tool. And we have found it with our Division II, NCAA Division II athletes here, that poor performance, not just in the overall score, but if they have an asymmetry or a low score, like a score of 1, then they're 2.6 times, like this dust, right? 2.6 times more likely to get a musculoskeletal injury. So
you need to put your glasses on when you do that.
Yeah, it has to sound so formal. Sounds so formal. Yeah.
Right.
And you're rolling.
I got black on today. Does that count? I don't know.
That could work.
I don't know.
Okay, so
I know that's good.
Okay.
That's good.
I'm going to try to remain apolitical and be very thought provoking on this. I'm sure I would imagine you have an answer, but if you don't, feel free to say I have no idea. Ready? Biomechanics in sports. I mean, let's discuss this whole transgender issue that's going on. I would love your thoughts and opinion on the male to female transition and what that is. How do you feel about that in sports and what's going on?
I think I'm personally still formulating all of that. I mean, and yet to come, I hope that we get some people that are, you know, have that hormonal endocrine system background together with the coaches, with the athletes who are wanting or already have transitioned. I hope we get people together at the same table and talk about, hey, you know, we don't want to deny people sport participation, but is this the right category? Do we need another category? How do we do all this? I don't have that endocrine system background, you know, but I think we can all probably comfortably say that if you transition after puberty, man, you've been training with testosterone.
Yeah, right.
And you've got the broader shoulders you know, you have those anatomical and physiological advantages going into it.
Interesting.
So maybe if you transition before puberty, is that different? I don't know. I don't know the data, but right, if you've been training with testosterone and you've already gotten the wider shoulders and maybe the slender hips for certain sports, that's pretty advantageous.
Good point. I didn't even think of that. I knew you would come up with something good. That was
right.
good.
Right.
It's food for thought. Yeah.
It is good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be a hot topic for a while, especially with with this being new and some of these girls have been training since they were 6, and now some person comes in.
My son is
so I think it's
college.
Figure things out.
He just actually got, well, let's just say he's not rowing for Temple right now, but he was a college rower, and he also is exercise and sports science major. And when that swimming issue came out, you know, the winning, I got this like a text right away. This is the ruin and demise of women's sports. You all have worked, you know, too much for this to happen. So, you know, there are a lot of people up in arms.
That's interesting to hear a college kid's point of view.
Yeah.
Because they're usually a little more open.
Right.
About,
right. Well, I think they're open until they're a female that gets their ass handed to them by some person that just entered into the transgender, and they've been trained their whole life. So I think it all depends. I think it all depends on who it is. I've worked with so many female sports, and so I have my opinion. But
I agree. We don't want to deny sport participation to people, man. But does that mean that you go right into women's sport? You know, maybe not. Yeah.
Well, I know Spencer wants to transition into master's level powerlifting and actually win a gold medal in the masters. So I think that's why he's
wrong.
in South Florida.
It was
can pull it off
water ballet.
Easier.
I don't know where you're coming up with it.
Oh, that's right. I forgot you made that move.
And the toes pointed, sticking out of the water. Oh, that's synchronized swimming too.
Synchronized swimming.
Yeah, I forgot. Well, he's got this. Yeah, he's got this beautiful new partner now that's been working with him on that, and Karen, I'm sure, has been helping a lot.
The only thing I know about synchronized swimming is that, believe it or not, when I was lecturing on concussion, I asked everyone, what do you think is the sport that has the most concussions? Percentage-wise, synchronized swimming.
Come on.
Because when they go underwater, there's so much like violent kicking and pushing against the water that every woman on the U.S. Olympic synchronized swimming team had a concussion.
Well, now that you say it like that, that's not surprising.
Gosh, right?
I mean, they have to enter the water pretty quickly, abruptly.
Yeah, all we see is when they get out of the water and everything's beautiful. Huh. They get up the moment they go under. Yeah.
That's kind of cool. All right, I'm going to switch from from Spencer's sport of synchronized swimming to another topic that's kind of interesting, and that's barefoot running. So what's your thoughts on, because that's kind of a big movement, especially out here, a barefoot movement, barefoot running, especially when it compares to people with athletic footwear. Well, actually, Spencer likes to call them sneakers, which
what do you call it,
term in
Dr. Mokha?
20 years, but he calls them sneakers.
What do you call it?
But,
footwear.
Running shoes, if I'm talking about runners, maybe?
I call them shoes, or
sneakers.
Sneakers.
Yeah.
So
all right, back to the question.
Yeah, that's whatever. So when people are considering buying, I know when he does get his feelings hurt. When people are athletes are considering buying footwear, let's talk about footwear, barefoot running, zero drop shoe versus what's your thoughts as a biomechanic expert on running injuries and foot
I know
injuries
sometimes people don't like to hear this, but you ready?
Yeah.
It's going to be really benign. It depends.
Yep.
No.
All right. So but let's say that it's me. I'm almost 5'8". Let's say that I actually had about 50 more pounds on, and I'm like, you know what? I want to start running because I can burn calories. Maybe I want to do a fun run, make some money for a cause, that kind of thing. I'm really into it. I got a group of people, and I start this, and I'm like, and this barefoot running thing, I really want to try it, and I go out. I'm going to end up on your table or someone else's table. I'm tall and bigger, have excess body weight. That's probably not the physique that needs to be going into barefoot running. So if I am the typical runner physique, though, or the average, runner physique, doesn't even have to be world class, but maybe they're, slimmer, little compact size, and they've been running for a while, then to transition into that would be a good idea. So my husband is about 5'7", maybe between 135 and 140. So he's a smaller stature guy. He likes to run in the hot, hot sun. I had all of a sudden had a Dr. Seuss book come into my head. But he likes to run for fun in the hot, hot sun. And he was talking to me about this. And I was like, honey, you actually have the perfect physique. You're very fit. He runs 7-8 miles every other day. you know what? You should try it, but don't go out for a full 7-mile run right away. Like, why don't you try go 2 miles and then, you know, and he's like, what am I supposed to do with my shoes? Hold them in my hand and then put them on? And yes, no, or I even offered, I go, listen, I'll be home Sunday morning. I can meet you with your shoes, you know? So let's get back to the point is, man, if your physique and your training history are not in line, you know, you don't have that sort of runner physique. And if you all of a sudden go from shoes to no shoes, that's when we see problems. So whether it's go ahead.
What about, well, all right, let's even take it into the shoe category. You have your zero drop shoe, you have some shoes like Hoka's are very cushy, which changes your biomechanics altogether. And so you have some shoes that are they're fighting the structure of the foot, some that are working with the structure of the foot, some that are neutral to the structure of your foot. So as a biomechanic, what are you looking for? Because in nature, an arch is not supported by something underneath it, supported by the structure. So when are you trying to get the structure stronger so it can handle the biomechanical forces?
But with all due respect to our colleagues in sports science, evolutionary biomechanics, running biomechanics in the Northeast that are doing that type of thing, and we're advocating that, you know, this is how we ran when we were cave dwellers, and that, you know, believe me, if shoes were available back then, they would have put a pair on, right? You know, like, but I guess I'm not convinced that that's the way we should run. And then the research that I see is really mixed. When I go to the sport biomechanics conferences, when you read the literature, it's really mixed. So you're like, yeah, it was a great treatment for this runner. Man, their plantar fasciitis, beautiful. You know, or whatever injury they had. And then this other runner, oh, well, they had to withdraw from the study because they had tibia problems or gastrocnemias, calf issues, strains. So I know I'm not leaning toward it. I'm not leaning toward advocating, you know, no support on your feet or minimal support on your feet. It really is.
It's more of a case by case.
It really is. If you make those blanket statements and then someone goes and tries it and ends up not being able to run for a week, that's going to kill me.
In regards to that, it was always fascinating that at the beginning of football season, and when we had these, when we had these, the bubble, you know, where the turf was fortified with little rubber pellets and everything, that in the first couple of weeks, if not month of training, they were all wearing cleats, standard issue, you know, from whoever our sponsor was at the time. And many of the guys would come in with, you know, just not necessarily shin splints, but just a dull ache in any of the muscles and joints of the ankle or the knee, because they're not used to, they're used to running on ground, on earth.
Right.
And when they get into that turf, the amount of shock absorption, the amount of shock that reverberates back, I think was harming them at first, or causing, you know, a significant amount of soreness.
Most probably, because that's the interface between them, the shoe, and the surface. So the surface makes a big deal as well, and you've got to get used to that because you had no choice in your situation. No, that's where these athletes had to be. Yeah, it just takes time, and coaches don't have time, right? You know, they're like, no, we gotta. But in an ideal setting, whether you want a barefoot run, so let's not dog it totally. You want a barefoot run, you want to run on turf. It takes time to acclimatize to that, and you just didn't have time in your setting. Do you guys remember the air huaraches? I used to call them air headaches. This is when, I was working with the track and cross country team at the University of Arkansas, you may not know, they're the winningest track and cross country team in the entire nation, right? Triple Crown champions, like so many, years of all that. But I was working with them back then, and they were wearing these air huaraches now and then, and I was like, oh my gosh, you got get out of these shoes. Yeah. So there are times, I guess, when I get real absolute and get out of this shoe.
Those are old. I haven't heard that brand name in ages.
Those are old. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the model. Yeah.
Terry, no, good, because I'm gonna go into my rapid fire questions unless you okay. All right,
go for it. Go for it.
All right.
I gotta tell you, I'm gonna prep you on this, but first I gotta tell I keep wanting to burst out into laughter with the "run for fun in the hot, hot sun" Dr. Seuss comment. It keeps coming up in my little pea brain, and
there's a lot of weird stuff happening in here when we talk, and sometimes it comes out, and I have to tell myself, you don't have to say everything that happens. So, thanks, Terry.
Oh yeah, you do.
Yeah,
you do. Because we do. We have no filter half the time.
Okay,
so
Dr.
you don't
Seuss,
have to worry about it.
I mean, Doctor, I have rapid fire questions.
all right.
Try to give it the brief answers, and unless we want to know a little bit more, we might delve into that. But here we go. We got 5 of them. Now, brace yourself and sit up good and solid in your seat. And the question number 1 is, what is the most unusual question off the top of your head you have been asked as a professor, and what was your answer?
I had a student like 2 years ago ask me, they were all asking each other questions, get to know each other. And I said, okay, you can have 3 questions and ask me. Somebody's like, where'd you go to school? That kind of stuff. And this one goes, what's the most dangerous thing you've ever done? I mean, A+ for her, but I was so caught off guard, and I was like, I used to walk through the alleyways in downtown Cleveland at night, and I just stopped. It's true, but I don't think that's what she was looking for. I think she was looking for like bungee jump or something. But that would have been thrilling, not dangerous.
That answer could be devastating, especially these days.
So I'll know that don't go down to Cleveland at night. I'll just know that.
Question number 2.
In the alleyway.
Is your favorite musical group and or song?
Favorite all-time musical group is the Eagles.
Ooh. Yeah, I knew Terry was going to get excited.
Love them. I am going to get excited. Better than the crap you listen to.
All right. So what's wrong with ABBA? Come on. All right.
Dad's queen.
Number 3. Yeah, I made a mistake of singing that queen in my hallway of my office. Anyway, never mind. It's it gets stuck in your head, kind of like run for fun in the hot sun.
No, it doesn't.
Sorry. All right. Question number 3. What is your best study tip now that people are back in class?
Let's see. Frequent rehearsal. So even when you're sitting down to have lunch, rewrite, go over, talk out your notes. Frequent rehearsal.
Frequent rehearsal. I like it. All right. Number 4.
Oh, I like that.
What do you feel is the most common risk factor seen in athletes?
Oh. So I get the breadth of your question, right? Because we could say, in throwing athletes, in running athletes, that kind of thing. So I'm answering this overall. So of course there'll be some exceptions here along the way. I would say 2 things. That you guys see all this, that hip dysfunction, like they can't control dynamically, they can't control their hip pelvis in space. Definitely in my runners, I see that. They put a foot down and the opposite side of the pelvis falls. I'm like, you're a college runner. So it's not like they don't know how to do it, but that dynamic control of the hip. Second thing, I think I'm seeing more of this, like in soccer players and stuff, is restricted ankle motion when they're on the ground, like closed chain. So restricted ankle motion. Those are things I want to fix right away. Yeah.
Now, I'm gonna. Okay, so when I say risk factor, and I think those are very valid. Those are very valid. But I do believe
I didn't answer the question right.
Yeah, no. You did. But I do want to have you make note of something that keeps coming up in different situations, such as immune system and injuries in sport. What would you say about body mass index?
Well, we don't use that much with athletes, right? Just because it's not always, many of our athletes are gonna have a larger muscle mass, a larger mass overall because of the muscle. So, but I will tell you this, in our NSU athletes, there were actually two things that were risk factors for musculoskeletal injury, like statistically panned out, got it published, Journal of Athletic Training. Those asymmetries and scores of 1 on the FMS and higher body fat. So not necessarily BMI, but higher body fat. So if you are over fat, not necessarily huge, but if you're over fat and you don't move well, surprise, surprise, those are risk factors for injury.
Good one. All right. Now, number 5 is going to be a lot easier. What is your favorite? You know what? I just, like you had a Dr. Seuss flashback. I just had a Monty Python and the Holy Grail flashback of the troll that's crossing the bridge. What is your favorite color? Oh, my favorite. All right. Never mind. Sorry. What is your favorite? What is your favorite? Excuse me. I don't even know why I got the accent back.
You're still doing it.
What is your favorite research article?
Keep going with it, Spencer. You're killing it.
Favorite research article? Gosh.
How about this? I'll narrow it down. Yours, because you've published a ton.
Oh, one that my team and I have turned out. I got you. Probably that one about the movement screen and yeah.
Okay, very good. Why?
But can I have not a second favorite, but sort of?
Yeah.
All right.
Terry, there's one with the football players. We haven't talked any about what we've been doing here, what I've been doing with NFL draft prep and looking at running biomechanics and trying to quantify how they're getting faster. But speaking of, like, this is what we're working on. So this is going to be my new favorite when it gets out there. So we're working on it right now. So what I'm finding, in short, maybe you're not surprised, the bigger players, so the offensive linemen, the guards, those kind of guys, when they're running to try to build up their speed, no surprise, they produce more force. They hit the ground harder than the lighter wide receivers, defensive backs. But when you normalize that force to their body mass, so when, make it relative to them, they run softer. Bigger they are, the softer they run.
Interesting.
Yeah. And maybe because if they were to put down the amount of force per their own body mass, their knee would explode. I don't know. I'm just kidding. It's not really going to explode, but maybe it's a tissue preservation. So I think that's going to be my favorite article that we're working on right now.
So let me understand that. I'm going to ask you to elaborate
cool
on
stuff.
that, because our really listeners might find this fascinating, because I definitely do. So you're saying, like, pound for pound, or if you compare
pound for pound.
But okay, pound for pound, that the heavier athletes run softer, or the defensive and offensive linemen versus the wide receivers and the cornerbacks, right? Is that?
Yes. So they're bigger guys. So when they hit the ground and you measure force, so everyone, right? Force is measured in a Newton, like those cookies. It's measured, that's just the unit. like pounds for your weight. It's measured in a Newton. And so, yeah, they're more Newtons than the smaller guys. But when you say, you know what, let's make it relative to your weight. How much force you put out per how much you weigh, it's lower. They're not putting out, yeah.
Dr. Terry, I got to tell you, I have had the luxury of seeing Dr. Mokha's domain, her cave, the office that she really works out of, and that, I mean, it has, you know, force plates and then cameras identifying running biomechanics. I mean, it's really so cool. Yeah. So
that's cool.
I love it. And you're such an asset to the sports world. So let me okay, we're done with the 5 rapid fire questions. Absolutely fantastic. I want to ask you in reference to, similar to the conversation that we just started with the the heavier versus the lighter athlete. When you observe changes in walking or running biomechanics following an ACL injury or a surgery, are you familiar with some of the mapping, the remapping that goes on in the brain? You know, when someone's been limping for such a long period of time, or someone's been rehabbing for a long time, you know, it's almost like you're gonna move differently, almost like a reflex. You know, I was reading an article about ACL, about brain remapping after an ACL injury. Can you share some thoughts if you have any about that?
I can speak a little bit, even though it's not my area, so I don't want to get into you know, areas that I'm not doing. But yes, and you know, you're right that there are changes in our brain, in our motor cortex, with injury, and then even if we go through surgery and rehabbing, and some of those changes they're negative changes, and they persist even after you're recovered. So you could still have, and they can persist on the uninjured side. So while I don't study that, you know, I've attended enough sessions, that kind of thing, where you're like, yeah, this is what we're seeing in those ankle and knee and even hip injuries. I don't run a clinic in our lab. You know, it's an academic lab, so I don't have people coming before, during, after to track them like that. But does it happen? Yeah, you're going to see those changes, even on the uninjured side. And they measure that functional MRI. They see the changes in the brain too that happen. But we don't do that. I'm not doing that. But yeah.
Well, you know, cool. Actually, I can refer those out there that are, you know, are interested in the clinical aspect of it. But there was a great paper done by athletic trainers that did have the opportunity to do MRI and find that changes in the walking gait following resolution of an ACL injury because their body was so used to favoring it or so used to rehabbing. So it's always fascinating how we can explore the body. Yeah. So
those compensations can stick around unless you've got those good medical, you know, folks around you to help retrain.
Yeah. So there was a study you did in 2016 that I thought was really fascinating because it also liberates us old folks, especially the ones in South Florida that are often victim of falls and trips, you know, and not being able to land properly. You guys did a study that expanded the age range. Could you elaborate on some of what you found, if you remember the study?
Okay, I do know what study you're speaking about, but respectfully, my colleague Tobin Silver, he's the lead author on that, and he actually conducted all of that. And then my role was I was helping him make a little sense of some things and get it massaged for the avenue that he was interested for publishing. So I did not collect those data, but I helped him with the other aspects of it. I do want to pop something in about that. Is he's shown it in class a couple times, but a video that was taken during his data collection of him. So not the people he's testing, but you could see them and him. And what he did was he was down low by the next to this special treadmill, and he would have like you can imagine like a pull stick coming out, and it had a little, it was designed to trip people. So he would put it out in front of them while they're on the treadmill, and they had these glasses on where they couldn't see down. So they didn't know when it was going to happen, and they couldn't see him. They were just walking along on the treadmill. I believe it was self-selected pace, so not too slow, not too fast. It was a walking study, it wasn't athletes. And then you see him, and he would put this hazard in their way, and they would trip, and they had belts on, so that they wouldn't actually fall. And then he would measure how much the trunk leaned, how much the knee flexed, the ankles flexed, what was the timing, the center of mass, like your center of gravity of your body, like what was how fast did it move forward and down. So those were some of the measures, that he was looking at. Or did you step over it, or did you go down right away? But the video that's on him, back to that point, is that he'd push it through and they would trip, and he'd go, you see this in the video, you see him like giggling, like, yeah. Because I guess, you can watch people trip. It's a human funny thing. Yeah. But those were some of the things that he looked at. But admittedly, it wasn't my study.
All in the name of science.
Yeah, but that's how you have to do it. You got to try to trip them as naturally as possible, whether it's with an obstacle, or some people do it how they will change the speed of the treadmill real fast so that, they have to stutter step. But his was an obstacle tripping.
I love it. I love that.
Now, with the older athletes, did you ever have any injuries from that?
Well, he had a harness anyway on them. So the harness around here, so in case they would go down,
Oh, okay.
And no ankle sprains or anything occurred during it. But you don't want that to happen to anyone, clearly. But wouldn't that have been cool data to have?
I mean, when you have an age range of 20
everyone
to 70,
healthy at the start and at the finish. Of his study. You guys know Dr. Stuart McGill, right?
Oh, yeah.
The back biomechanist. So then you might know, but there's the story of where he had the transducers, in the spine, so he can evaluate the loads on the spine while people were lifting. And he had the strongmen in there. You know how they pick up that big ball? And someone actually herniated a disc during his data collection. So that's one of your oh shit, and oh wow, cool, get the cameras going. Yeah.
Right. That's great.
Very interesting. Okay, sorry.
Totally. No, that's good.
All right. No, that was fantastic. All right. In closing, I do have to ask you this. So if you could leave as a professor, an academic, a doctor, all your hats you wear, if you could leave one piece of advice for our listeners with your name on it for all eternity, because this is going to go into the cloud for always.
Stick your bat out.
What would that one piece
just
of
take
advice
a swing, man.
Oh, interesting.
That's my advice, and I have said that to my students before. Just try, man. People are so afraid to just put a little bit out there. Even if it's in their writing. I used to tell my grad students, I was like, just on the paper, then at least we got something to work with. Stick your bat out. Let's do something. Try.
You know what? I like that. Yeah.
I love that. and thank you for that last piece, because that's how I write. And Dr. Spencer and Lance are always yelling at me because they're, do you know how to use periods and punctuation? Because I don't. I just, I throw it out there, and then I just see, Spencer, I'm doing something right. I'm getting it out there. Hey, on behalf of on behalf of Spencer, thank you so much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy day and sharing a little bit of knowledge with everybody. And I think you'd be a fantastic teacher. I mean, I'm not a Stones fan, but I am a
Oh,
Black
yeah.
Pants, Boots, and all that fan. And Eagles, you knocked out of the park. So
Thank you for the
so thank you
invitation.
for
It's,
taking the
of
time.
course,
I
a
know you're really
pleasure.
busy,
Anything
so
you
thank
guys
very
need.
much.
Same. Pleasure's here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Crackin' Backs podcast. We hope you enjoyed, and make sure you follow our Instagram at Crackin' Backs Podcast. Catch new episodes every Monday. See you next time.